The 9th century was a period of extraordinary turbulence and chaos within both the secular and ecclesiastical realms of the Carolingian world. Nowhere was this instability more dramatically displayed than in the city of Rome, where political power struggles and factional violence gripped the papacy in an iron hold. The once holy office of the Bishop of Rome had become little more than a pawn in the hands of noble families, foreign rulers, and militarized factions seeking to install popes favorable to their agendas. Rome's nobility was fragmented into competing dynasties, each using their wealth and military backing to influence the church. Amid this climate of uncertainty and intrigue rose Formosus, a talented and highly regarded cleric who had previously served as Bishop of Porto, a suburb of Rome. His early reputation was built on his diplomatic abilities. He had been a papal envoy to the court of Charles the Bald and was instrumental in negotiating with the Bulgarian kingdom. However, his ambitions and affiliations soon attracted powerful enemies. Accusations of aspiring unlawfully to the papal throne and violating canon law by administering sacraments while under ecclesiastical censure were already following him before his ascension. Nevertheless, in 891, Formosus was elected pope, a position he held for 5 tumultuous years. His papacy was marked by his decision to invite Arnulf of Carinthia to liberate Rome from the control of Lambert of Spoleto, a powerful nobleman who had been crowned co-emperor by a previous pope. By siding with Arnulf, Formosus earned the enmity of Lambert and his allies. Though Arnulf succeeded in briefly entering Rome and being crowned emperor by Formosus in 896, his campaign soon faltered due to illness, and Lambert's faction regained dominance. When Formosus died in April of that same year, his political enemies seized their opportunity to exact revenge. It is within this fractured political theater that the seeds of one of the most bizarre episodes in church history, the Cadaver Synod, were sown. The events that followed would highlight not only the collapse of papal sanctity, but also the degree to which vengeance, spectacle, and power struggles had overtaken the spiritual core of the Roman Church. In January of 897, less than a year after the death of Pope Formosus, the Church in Rome convened a grotesque and unprecedented tribunal that would come to be known as the Cadaver Synod, or Synodus Horrenda. Orchestrated by Formosus' political rival and immediate successor, Pope Stephen VI or VII. The synod was not a mere legal formality, nor a posthumous audit of papal deeds. It was rather a deeply symbolic and theatrical display of political vengeance carried out under the guise of ecclesiastical procedure. Formosus' decaying corpse was exhumed from its resting place in St. Peter's Basilica, dressed in the full regalia of the papacy, and seated on a throne within the Lateran Basilica, the church's central administrative seat. The corpse was propped upright and physically presented before a synod of bishops, clergy, and nobles assembled for the purpose of putting a dead man on trial. A deacon was appointed to speak on behalf of the deceased, answering charges that Formosus had unlawfully assumed the papacy while still bishop of another diocese, had violated church canons, and had committed perjury and sacrilege. The image of a robed skeleton being tried like a living man shocked even those accustomed to the violence and disorder of the time. Yet Stephen VI, under pressure from Lambert of Spoleto and his mother Ageltrud, was determined to obliterate Formosus' legacy. The synod, acting as judge and jury, declared Formosus guilty on all counts. His pontificate was pronounced null and void, his acts and ordinations invalidated, and his body subjected to symbolic degradation. The 3 fingers of his right hand, those used in conferring papal blessings, were cut off. His corpse was stripped of papal vestments and eventually buried in a common grave. Still unsatisfied, Stephen ordered the body dug up once more and thrown into the Tiber River, Rome's lifeblood and sewer. This shocking spectacle was intended as a deterrent and a public humiliation, yet it had the opposite effect. Rather than consolidating power, Stephen VI's actions sparked revulsion and backlash among the Roman populace and clergy, setting in motion a swift and brutal retribution. The grotesque nature of the Cadaver Synod scandalized even a Roman society accustomed to brutality and political scheming. The desecration of a pope's body was a transgression of not only ecclesiastical law, but also of social and religious decency. To many, Stephen VI's trial of a corpse represented the moral nadir of the papacy, an institution that had increasingly become a tool of secular domination rather than a spiritual beacon. Public reaction was swift and visceral. Outraged by the desecration and perceived blasphemy, the Roman citizenry turned against Stephen VI. Riots broke out across the city, and his political support, fragile to begin with, evaporated. Within months of the Cadaver Synod, Stephen was imprisoned by a rebellious faction of the clergy and laity. In August 897, he was found strangled in his cell, the likely victim of a mob or rival faction seeking to avenge Formosus. His death marked the first major backlash against the political corruption of the Church, but did little to end the cycle of retribution. In the wake of the Cadaver Synod, a series of rapid and often short-lived pontificates followed. Pope Romanus briefly succeeded Stephen VI, but was quickly deposed. His successor, Pope Theodore II, reigned for only 20 days, yet his short tenure was pivotal. He annulled the Cadaver Synod, reinstated the validity of Formosus ordinations, and ordered his body recovered from the Tiber and reburied in St. Peter's Basilica with full honors. This symbolic rehabilitation was meant to restore sanctity to the papacy, though the damage to the Church's moral authority would linger for decades. Following Theodore, Pope John IX continued these efforts at restoration by holding two synods, one in Rome and another in Ravenna, which reaffirmed the invalidation of the Cadaver Synod and forbade the future exhumation and trial of corpses. These papal decisions were designed to restore dignity to the Church and reinforce ecclesiastical procedures that separated politics from sacred duty. However, peace was fleeting. A few years later, when Pope Sergius III rose to power in 904, he reversed the decisions of John IX and Theodore II. Sergius, a former ally of Stephen VI, reinstated the verdict of the Cadaver Synod, though he did not attempt to exhume Formosus again. This flip-flopping highlighted the continued politicization of the papacy and the inability of church institutions to impose enduring stability amid a fractured and violent society. The Cadaver Synod remains one of the most macabre and haunting episodes in the annals of church history. It is frequently cited by historians and theologians as the most vivid example of how the papacy, during this era, had become entangled in the toxic web of secular power politics. The spectacle of a dead pope being tried in full regalia, having his fingers chopped off, and being cast into a river exemplifies how far the institution had drifted from its spiritual origins. For centuries after the event, the Cadaver Synod would be invoked as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition, corruption, and the misuse of religious authority. In many ways, it marks the symbolic low point of the so-called pornocracy, a term later historians would use to describe the century of papal corruption and aristocratic interference in Roman ecclesiastical affairs. The idea of trying a corpse, in retrospect, can be seen not only as a perversion of justice, but also as an expression of desperation, an effort by a decaying political class to reassert its legitimacy through sheer spectacle. While later medieval and Renaissance popes would restore the prestige of the Holy See, the Cadaver Synod continued to lurk in the historical memory of the Church. Its legacy is evident in the increasing codification of canon law and the eventual rise of papal reform movements that sought to purify the Church of worldly influence. Even today, the Cadaver Synod is referenced in discussions about religious excess, political manipulation, and the surreal capacity for human institutions to turn sacred rituals into grotesque pageantry. It has inspired numerous books, academic studies, and cultural references. In the modern era, the event has also served as a metaphor for institutions that cannibalize their past or destroy their own legitimacy in pursuit of narrow political ends. Beyond its gory surface, the Cadaver Synod forces a reckoning with uncomfortable truths about the nature of power and the vulnerability of even the most sacred offices to corruption. It shows how symbolic acts, even when absurd or horrifying, can have lasting ramifications. In the case of Formosus, his legacy outlived his detractors. Though desecrated and disgraced in death, he was ultimately vindicated by history. Today, Pope Formosus is remembered more for the injustice done to him than for the controversies of his pontificate. Meanwhile, the Cadaver Synod endures as a surreal but sobering reminder of the grotesque intersection between politics, vengeance, and faith in a world where the boundary between the living and the dead was all too easily crossed.